All right, so I'm going to hand over to Vince if he's there and let him take you through the panel discussion on sustainable homes in the Tweed.
Great, thanks very much, Tracy, and it's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon, and I hope you've had a good day to start with the many interesting topics that we're getting through today. So today we're going to get on now to our Sustainable Homes in the Tweed panel, and I think this is just a great opportunity to gain some insights and some practical knowledge about how best to go about designing and building sustainable homes in our area. Just as a bit of background, I just wanted to give you the context of why we're here today, and that new homes in the Tweed are increasingly being designed for low utility bills and comfortable indoor-outdoor living temperatures year-round. In 2019, more than 25% of applications for new home builds in the Tweed exceeded the state government's basic sustainability index for water and energy performance. So it's great to see that the demand growing for smart homes that are designed to perform well in our climate. And we need this to become the norm as part of global efforts to slow the growth of greenhouse gas emissions and aim for more absorption of greenhouse gases than we emit to be net zero by 2050. But as anyone who's been through a home build or renovation project, there's a lot of effort that goes into the research, the planning, and working with others to bring a home building project into fruition. So today's panel discussion will delve into some considerations that will help ensure your next building project performs as well as it can to create a comfortable, efficient and effective home for the extent of its life. And we're very lucky today to have a great panel with us, and I'll just give you a bit of background to each of the our speakers and panelists today. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Wan, who's a locally based registered architect with over 20 years experience in the building industry. Her search for a deeper understanding of green building techniques led her to Brazil in 2008, where she was mentored by the world famous author of The Barefoot Architect, Johan van Leggen, at his Bioarchitecture Institute, located in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. This deep theoretical as well as practical immersion in all things eco at the Institute, including grey water systems, passive house design, green roofs, earth building techniques, and composting toilets, eventually led Rebecca to start her own eco-building business in Latin America in 2011, with the ultimate aim of bringing these techniques to Australia to be incorporated into workshops and practical learning for participants keen to incorporate green techniques into their own building projects. Rebecca's motto is start small and start with what you have. Big changes will eventuate. Having spent weeks at a time at the Wuyong camping ground during her childhood, she has a deep love and appreciation for the Tweed. Rebecca, I'd like to welcome you here today. Secondly, and we've got two members here from our Tweed Shire Council team. And firstly, I'd like to introduce Colleen Forbes, who's the Team Leader Development Assessment Tweed Shire Council. Colleen is a qualified town planner with 9 years experience prior to joining Council's Development Assessment team 17 years ago. Colleen provides pre-lodgement advice as part of Council's Development Assessment panel and project manages the approvals for the new Cobgai development site. Having grown up in Tweed, Colleen is a strong advocate for well-designed development that incorporates innovation and sustainable outcomes for the local environment. Welcome, Colleen, today. Next, we have Dean Napier, who's the team leader of building surveying at Tweed Shire Council. Dean is qualified as a building surveyor 33 years ago and has worked in 3 councils within New South Wales. Each of these have had a high volume of DAs and construction certificate components. For the past 18 years, Dean has been working at Tweed Shire Council and has guided many applicants through the development and construction phase of their projects. Welcome, Dean. And finally, but not least, is James Mcgregor, and he's the CEO and founder of the Blue Tribe Company and works with innovators, change makers, and leaders to develop scalable solutions to some of the most challenging environmental and social problems. Prior to founding the Blue Tribe Company, James led numerous innovation programs at the CSIRO, including projects in biofuels, world record-breaking solar thermal technologies, smart grid technology, intelligent agent-based modelling technologies, low emissions power generation, and innovations in sustainable building environments. Most recently, James has been working closely with the building industry to accelerate the uptake of net zero energy homes, more sustainable renovations, which includes taking on the production on a new lifestyle TV show aimed at driving mainstream demand for sustainable housing. He has even served as a cavalry officer in the Australian Army. And welcome aboard, James. So look, we're now going to get into the actual discussion and some interrogation of some of our panel members. And we're going to cover across three main phases of development, being design, approvals, and build stages. So if we firstly go to the design phase, and I'm going to ask Rebecca to assist us in her insights to this initial stage. And what you can see there on your screen is how our council go about and have developed its own town planning controls as a guide to applicants to really sort of go through, analyse each site as they come through and attempt to adapt these types of passive design and climate resilience strategies. But as such an important phase of this whole cycle, Rebecca, firstly, can I ask you, in your experience helping clients design sustainable homes, what are the biggest challenges we are faced with in taking the next steps towards a more sustainable lifestyle?
Well, thank you very much, Vince, and hopefully you can hear me okay. The volume's all right. I think, well, in my experience, I think a lot of people get a bit overwhelmed with the amount of information that's out there, and also how to disseminate that and find out what's actually appropriate for your own lifestyle and for your family. And it really does also come down to your budget and thinking of it in terms of a sort of a cost-benefit analysis. So I find that really the first step is I often get a lot of clients who've been through a renovation in the past and they say, oh, we wish we had have thought of this, or we wish we had have done this. And I think that's really, it's a really key part of it. You know, it's really taking that time to understand how you are living your lifestyle and what your family really needs, and totally, you know, taking the time to break that down into its most simple parts, I suppose, and then really asking a lot of questions about how you would like to live in the future. And I think that we sort of barrel along thinking, oh, this is what we've had in the past and this is what our neighbours have got, and we don't take the time to think about what we really need as the bare minimum for our lifestyle, and compromise in that regard. So I think we're bombarded with all this information and we think, yes, we've got to get the solar panels in, we've got to get the rainwater tanks going, and we've got to do all these things and tick all those boxes. But sometimes we forget to think about how we actually want to feel in that space, and creating a space that's actually really going to nurture ourselves and our family is a really big part of that. So it's not just those tick boxes, it's thinking about it in a really holistic strategy, and thinking about right now, and also how your house is able to adapt into the future and for many, many years. And I think that's a really big part of it.
Great. So where should people get information about their site, like summer sunrise and set versus the winter position of the sun, prevailing breezes and annual rainfall and the like?
I'm reading. There's so much information out there. There's some really good websites for sun, and this is actually an interesting one because I've taught university students for many, many years, and I often ask them, you know, tell me about the sun path and the sun, you know, during the winter and the summer, and a lot of the students have got absolutely no idea, and it's really so critical to understanding your site. It's the first and foremost factor, and there's some great sites such as suncalc.org. You can go in there, type in your location, and you'll see for any day of the year, you'll see where the sun path is travelling. And a lot of people don't realise that the sun is so much lower in the winter than it is in the summer, and there's actually a huge difference depending where you are on the planet as to what's happening. And we do get a big variation here in the Tweed, and understanding the sun path is really fundamental to how we start to then design in our passive solar the fenestration on the windows and pergolas, and everything comes back to that sun, really. So sun calc is great. The BOM has a huge amount of information on rainfall, wind during the year. You want to know where you're getting your prevailing summer winds. We know generally in the Tweed anyway, we know that we love our northeasterlies that we can get, and generally around the caldera we have some amazingly strong westerlies that come through during certain months of the year. But there's wind roses on the BOM, there's the rainfall, but just getting on your site, and understanding that, and just really taking the time to look and to see and to understand that is really part of it, instead of just getting all that data. And I'm definitely one of the sort of people that just very theoretical. I bombard myself with books and books and books of theoretical knowledge, but at the end of the day, you've really got to start to become more in tune with the environment, and that's about being outside and feeling, instead of just going from our air-conditioned home into our air-conditioned car to our air-conditioned office. It's about really starting to feel those elements and realise that we're actually living in a very amenable climate, and start to feel how we can incorporate that into our life instead of try to block it out. So that's really important, especially where we live here. We're so lucky.
We are lucky, Rebecca. And so for those people who do want to avoid the mechanical heating and cooling, what are your main tips for trying to advance those more passive design techniques?
So a big part of that is, like I said, just understanding your site and understanding the orientation. Orientation is absolutely key. So you want to try to orientate any of your living spaces towards the north. Very important part of it. Obviously, if you've got an existing home and you're trying to work out how can I reduce my air conditioning load, it's about getting that right sort of sun shading onto your windows. But think about your garden as well, and think about how much greenery we've got outside, and can we get in any deciduous vines growing on some pergolas that in the winter there's no leaves there, so we can have the sun coming in and warming our house, while in the summer it's providing a really dense green roof, basically, that's really cooling the air as it comes up to the house. So there's things like that, but it comes back to the orientation first and foremost, and then there's some other principles that follow on from that. But understanding where your site is and the topography, what way it's falling, whether it's to the north or the south, and working with that, it's really important. And then you can start to design around your lifestyle and how you want to use the house during the day and each space.
And things like building materials, what can you give us guidance on that?
So building materials are really important. It's important to ask questions of where these materials are coming from. Are they being transported from the other side of the country? Are they being trucked in from many, many miles away? Are they all being shipped in? Are they being flown in? So that's what's known as embodied energy, and that's the whole life cycle of a place. And when we talk about carbon neutrality, you can say, I've heard some manufacturers say, oh no, aluminium's a very sustainable product because you can recycle it. So that is true, and that's part of it, but we have to start asking more questions. What's the energy that actually goes into extracting that aluminium and producing that? It's extremely high in embodied energy compared to other building materials. So don't believe everything that manufacturers or product reps, for instance, will tell you. Start to ask a lot of questions about that life cycle. So it's about getting in really sustainably sourced products, but also in terms of just simple things as in colour. Obviously we want to go as light as possible. We know the difference between being in a black car to a white car. It's the same with our house. So even though it might be a lot more designery, if you have a black clad home, and I've seen a few of them popping up around this region, it might be relevant in Melbourne, where we've got it's a much cooler climate, or in Europe, but it's certainly not something that we want to be using in this region. It's just completely impractical.
Right. Climate change, climate factors are a big issue for people, and especially the change in the frequency and the severity of extreme events like floods, heat waves, water restrictions, bushfires. How do you think we can address these types of factors into the design of our homes, and just some practical ways that you can suggest?
Well, obviously, we are, every year we're faced with unprecedented times, and we're having to become more aware of what's happening around us and more adaptable. Obviously, the Tweed Shire Council has lots of flood mapping, bushfire mapping that we can access and have a look at, what's where it's bushfire prone land, and also just what the flood mapping or the predictability of the huge events is like. But at the end of the day, it's about trying to become as really reliant on your site as possible. And it's about it's not just within the home, it's your whole family's lifestyle. So it's about getting that composting happening. If we've got a really small site, it's still trying to get in as much garden. Even if you've got a small front lawn that can actually produce enough food to feed a family, it's actually amazing how much we can actually grow from a small amount of space. So it's about just becoming really self-sufficient, but within that also becoming more community minded as well. And so it's that community focus and the individual focus that will really start to make a big change, instead of relying on government to create policy change and local government. It's really coming down to where we can make those small gestures, because every small gesture really does make such a difference. And if we can start working with our community, getting those community gardens really thriving, and that it's about mental resilience as much as anything. We want to feel like we're thriving in this environment and not feeling fearful of change and fearful of tomorrow. We want to feel like we're actually doing the best we actually can in our family and within our community to make every small change that we can, because those small changes really make the big changes.
Fantastic. Rebecca, now this is a tricky one. What are the pitfalls that people commonly do when they're thinking about their design as an architect? What sort of guidance can you give people?
So I think one of the key things that I've noticed is that, again, coming back to one of the things I talked about earlier, it's not questioning what you really need enough to have a comfortable lifestyle. And I give an exercise to my clients with new builds. It's called the least house necessary, and it's about asking for each space, what is actually the minimum requirement that you need, instead of just thinking, well, we think this is what we need because this is, again, what our neighbours are having, and that this is going to be adding more value to the house if we get that extra bedroom in. But have a think about what we can do to actually go as small as possible, because that's the most sustainable solution that we can actually come to from the get-go. It's go small, and then you've got more space for gardens, for internal courtyards, for bringing the landscape in. And that's going to make your environment so much more livable, but also add a lot of value. So I think some of the pitfalls are just not actually analysing that need, and just, continuing on in the way that we always have, instead of just really questioning that minimum requirement, because that is really key. So if we're going to a building designer or a drafter, often they're just drafting up what you tell them to. You say, okay, I want an extra bedroom and I want to remodel my kitchen. They just draft it up, and there you go. They won't come back to you with questions saying, but how do you actually want to use this space, and what do you want to do in the future, and how are we going to actually try to incorporate some more cross ventilation and some internal courtyards and this type of thing. So you've really got to understand, if you are going to a building designer, get them to start asking you. You need to ask questions and just think about how we can get some more louvers in, and just really using maximising every square inch of your house and your site. So that's one of the pitfalls, not asking enough questions. And then also it's just, I think that's probably the biggest one, in fact. And yeah, not thinking of your home in terms of a whole lifestyle. It comes back to the sustainability check boxes that I was talking about, saying, okay, tick, 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 we've got this happening, but are we thinking about in terms of our whole environment? Because it's the garden, it's the home, it's our family, it's what we're using and needing now, but it's also thinking about perhaps multi-generational living in the future. It's thinking about aging in place so that we don't have to sell our house and move because it's got too many steps. It's thinking about how we can